Today we're going to read Wayside School is Falling Down by Louis Sachar. Chapter 3, Beebe's Baby Brother. Mrs. Jules asked Damien to pass back the homework. Beebe Gunn waited nervously. Except for art, her grades had not been very good lately. If she didn't start bringing home better grades, her parents said they wouldn't let her stay up past midnight. She did her best artwork after midnight. Damien handed Calvin his homework, then Todd, then Joy. "Where's yours?" asked Calvin. "I don't know," said Beebe. Did you do it?" asked Calvin. "Yes, I did it," said Beebe. "I worked extra hard on it. I hope Mrs. Jules didn't lose it." Damien finished passing out the homework. Beebe never got hers. "Beebe, will you come here, please?" said Mrs. Jules. She pushed out of her seat and stood up and nervously walked to Mrs. Jules's desk. "I did my homework, Mrs. Jules," she said. "Really?" "Yes, I know," said Mrs. Jules. She held Beebe's homework in her hand. "Whew!" Beebe sighed with relief. "I was afraid you lost it." "No, I didn't lose it," said Mrs. Jules sternly. She showed the back of the paper to Beebe. Someone had written, "Mrs. Jules is as fat as a hippopotamus, and she smells like one too." "I didn't write that," exclaimed Beebe. "I love the way you smell." Mrs. Jules smiled. "But if you didn't write it, who did?" "Ray," Beebe instantly replied. "Who's Ray?" "He's my little brother, Ray Gunn. He may have snuck into my room after I was asleep. He's always playing mean tricks on me. He knew how hard I worked on my homework." "Well, we'll show Ray," said Mrs. Jules. She gave Beebe an A+. "There. I don't think he'll try that again." "Thanks," said Beebe. "You may have a Tootsie Roll Pop, too," said Mrs. Jules. Beebe took a Tootsie Roll Pop out of the coffee can on Mrs. Jules's desk, then returned to her seat. She proudly showed Calvin her A+. The next day, Mrs. Jules asked Damien to hand back out another batch of homework. "How come Damien always gets to do that? To do everything?" grudged Kathy. "I'm sorry, Kathy," said Mrs. Jules. "Would you like to pass back the homework?" "No," grumped Kathy. "I'm not your slave." Damien passed out the homework. Again, Beebe didn't get hers. Mrs. Jules called her to her desk. On the back of her homework, someone had written, "Mrs. Jules has a head full of oatmeal, and it leaks out of her ears." "I didn't write it," said Beebe. "Ray?" asked Mrs. Jules. Beebe nodded. "Why don't you start checking the back of your homework?" suggested Mrs. Jules. "But I did when I woke up," said Beebe. "He must have done it after breakfast, while I was brushing my teeth. We had oatmeal for breakfast." She shook her head. "I won't brush my teeth any more." "You have to brush your teeth," said Mrs. Jules. "My parents think he's such a little angel," Beebe complained. "He's always wrecking things. And then I'm always the one who gets in trouble. Why can't you be more like Ray?" they say. "Yesterday, he threw all my underwear out the window. Then my mother yelled at me for doing it. She wouldn't believe that her darling little son would do something like that." Mrs. Jules gave Beebe another A+, and then another Tootsie Roll Pop. For Friday, everyone had to write a report and read it to the class. Beebe wrote her report about George Washington. She stood at the front of the room and read it out loud. "George Washington never told a lie. Not like Mrs. Jules. She lies all the time. That's why her nose is so big, and she snores when she sleeps. So Mr. Jules has to wear earplugs." Everyone was laughing. Beebe stopped reading. "What's so funny?" she asked. "Come here," said Mrs. Jules. Beebe shrugged, then walked to Mrs. Jules's desk. Mrs. Jules showed her what she just read. "Did I just read that out loud?" Beebe asked. Mrs. Jules nodded. "I was just reading it," Beebe explained. "I wasn't listening." "It was Ray again, wasn't it?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Had to be," said Beebe. "Yesterday he put toothpaste in my socks. Then my mother got mad at me for making a mess and wasting toothpaste." Beebe got an A+ on her report and another Tootsie Roll Pop. After school, Mrs. Jules called Beebe's mother on the phone. Hello, Mrs. Gunn. This is Mrs. Jules from Wayside School. What's Beebe done now? Asked Mrs. Gunn. Beebe hasn't done anything wrong, said Mrs. Jules. She's a wonderful girl. Well, that's a surprise, said Mrs. Gunn. She's always causing trouble at home. I want to talk to you about that, said Mrs. Jules. I think you're being unfair to Beebe. I think she often gets in trouble when really Ray is to blame. Ray? Asked Mrs. Gunn. Yes, I know you think he's a perfect angel, said Mrs. Jules, but some children can be angels on the outside and devils underneath. Yes, that sounds like Beebe, said Mrs. Gunn. I'm not talking about Beebe. I'm talking about Ray. Ray? Asked Beebe's mother. Who's Ray?